Black CEO woman's seat was stolen by white passenger. Moments later, flight is grounded. The departure lounge carried its usual rhythm. Families gathering bags, business travelers tapping on keyboards, children tugging sleeves in impatience. Boarding announcements rolled out in steady intervals, guiding passengers toward the jet bridge. At the gate, a woman in her early 40s approached with a quiet authority that needed no introduction. Alicia Warren's attire was professional, her movements unhurried, her boarding pass already in hand. She didn't rush, didn't fumble, and didn't seek anyone's validation. The attendant glanced at her ticket, scanned it, and waved her forward without pause. Inside the aircraft, the business class section gleamed with leather seats and silver fixtures that promised comfort. Alicia slid her briefcase into the overhead bin, then settled into seat 3A, adjusting the cuff of her blazer as she exhaled softly. She carried herself with the composure of someone used to spaces where eyes lingered longer than they should. For now, though, she simply crossed her legs and waited for the rest of the cabin to fill. It started with glances. A couple in the row ahead leaned toward each other, whispering quietly, casting sidelong looks that lingered a fraction too long. A man stretching to stow his luggage hesitated, his brows narrowing, then shifted away without comment. None of them said anything aloud, but the unspoken judgment clung to the air. Who belongs here and who doesn't? Further down the aisle, Gregory Hale appeared. Mid-50s, shoulders pressed wide in a polo shirt, boarding pass clenched between his fingers. He walked with the confident impatience of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His eyes scanned the cabin until they landed on seat 3A, occupied. His jaw tightened, and for a moment he simply froze, lips parting in disbelief. He advanced slowly, each step deliberate, his gaze fixed on Alicia. When he reached her row, he stopped at her armrest, looming above her seat as though his height alone should command movement. The passengers nearby sensed the shift instantly. Conversations trailed off. A silence crept in, thin but sharp, waiting to see what he would do. Hale didn't sit down. He didn't move aside to let others pass. He stood there, ticket still pinched in his hand, eyes narrowing as if Alicia's presence were some kind of offense. A mutter escaped him just loud enough for those closest to hear. "This isn't right." Alicia remained still. Her hands rested lightly on the armrests, her expression calm, revealing nothing. She didn't look away, didn't shrink, didn't acknowledge his mutter. The lack of reaction seemed only to fuel him further. His breathing quickened. Passengers trickled past, sensing tension, their glances darting toward the standoff but quickly away again. It was the kind of moment travelers recognized. Something uncomfortable was unfolding, and no one knew how far it might go. The hum of the aircraft seemed to fade into the background. All eyes, one by one, began settling on row 3. If stories like this grip you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what country you're watching from. We'd love to know where our audience is tuning in. Gregory Hale finally leaned closer, casting his shadow across Alicia's seat. His voice was low, but firm enough to carry across the row. "You're in my spot." The words landed with the weight of certainty, as if the matter were already settled. His hand tightened around the boarding pass, lifting it slightly as proof of his claim. Still, Alicia did not move. She lifted her chin only slightly, eyes meeting his with a composure that made his tone sound almost childish in comparison. That restraint unsettled him even more. Whispers started up again from nearby passengers, threads of speculation winding through the cabin. The aisle behind them clogged as people slowed down, unwilling to miss what might happen next. Hale's face flushed deeper, his posture stiffening, as though the mere sight of her remaining seated was a direct challenge to his authority. And then, with a voice sharpened by impatience, he said something that froze the entire row and marked the moment the flight would never forget. Gregory Hale's words cut through the cabin. "You're in my seat." His tone wasn't a question, not even a demand. It was an accusation, heavy with the presumption that he couldn't possibly be wrong. Alicia lifted her eyes, her expression steady. Without raising her voice, she slipped her boarding pass from the pocket of her blazer and held it out for him to see. Seat 3A, printed clearly, undeniable. Gregory glanced at it, but instead of acknowledging the truth, his lips twisted into a smirk. "Nice try." He pulled his own crumpled ticket from his pocket and waved it above her head like a flag of victory. "This says 3A, paid for months ago." The confrontation had attracted the attention of the row across the aisle. A woman paused in settling her child, her gaze flicking between the two boarding passes. Another passenger raised an eyebrow, pulling out his phone, camera angled discreetly. Gregory leaned closer, his voice sharpening. "You must have traded seats, or got some last-minute upgrade. Happens all the time, but this one's mine." Alicia didn't flinch. She allowed a beat of silence before speaking, her words calm, even. "Sir, this is my assigned seat." She placed the boarding pass back on her lap, folding her hands neatly above it, signaling that the conversation, as far as she was concerned, was complete. But silence, especially dignified silence, often provokes louder voices from those unwilling to accept it. Gregory's face flushed red. His hand clutched the headrest of her seat, and his words rose above the low murmur of boarding passengers. "You're holding up the entire flight. Do you think people like me have time for this kind of nonsense?" A ripple went through the nearby rows. Phones lifted higher now, no longer discreet. Whispers carried forward, phrases half audible. "What's going on? Is she really in the wrong seat? I think he's making a scene." The aisle grew tighter as passengers slowed down, unwilling to pass until the standoff was resolved. Then the flight attendant appeared. Janet Morrison, her blonde hair pulled back into a neat bun, approached with the brisk efficiency of someone trained to diffuse conflict quickly. She plastered on a professional smile, though her eyes darted immediately to Gregory, then only briefly to Alicia. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes," Gregory said instantly, voice booming with confidence. "This woman is in my seat, 3A. Janet nodded, as though his word was confirmation enough. She turned to Alicia, her smile thinning. "Ma'am, could I ask you to step aside while we sort this out?" Alicia looked at her evenly, then lifted her boarding pass once more. "My seat assignment is 3A. Janet didn't take it. She didn't even lean close enough to read it. Instead, she shifted her attention back to Gregory. "Sir, if you'll just let me see your ticket." He handed it over triumphantly, like a conqueror presenting proof of victory. Janet scanned it, nodding, her posture subtly reinforcing his claim. Then, turning again to Alicia, she sighed. "Sometimes our system double books. It happens. If you'll just gather your things, we'll find you another place to sit." The murmurs in the cabin grew sharper, more pointed. Someone whispered, "Why isn't she checking both tickets?" Another muttered, "He doesn't even look like he's telling the truth." A passenger 2 rows back raised his phone high, ensuring the recording captured every angle. Alicia's composure never cracked. She extended the pass again, her voice even but firm. "You haven't looked at mine." Janet hesitated for a moment, caught in the weight of the eyes around her, then gave a tight smile that did nothing to mask her impatience. "Ma'am, I'll resolve this at the front. If you'll just come with me, we can avoid delaying departure." It was subtle, but clear. Alicia was being treated as the inconvenience, the obstruction, the one causing the delay. Gregory folded his arms, smug, already lowering himself toward the seat as though victory had been achieved. That single act, him lowering into the seat without permission, with the backing of a flight attendant who hadn't even glanced at both passes, drew a hush from the watching crowd. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was entitlement, validated by authority. One passenger whispered sharply, "She was there first." Another, louder this time, "Why won't they check her ticket?" Phones angled in closer. A young man across the aisle muttered, "I've seen this kind of thing before." Janet cleared her throat, gesturing toward the aisle. "Ma'am, please step aside." The humiliation was layered now, not just from Gregory's aggression, but from the authority siding against her without evidence, and the audience watching in silence, some sympathetic, some complicit. Alicia didn't move. Her hands remained still, her gaze fixed on the attendant who had dismissed her without so much as a glance at the truth in her hand. Around her, the tension thickened, phones recording every second, passengers waiting to see how far the injustice would stretch. And when Gregory finally dropped into the seat beside her, smirking with victory, the cabin held its breath. Because everyone knew, this wasn't over. Gregory Hale leaned back in the seat as if it already belonged to him. His voice rose over the cabin noise, carrying easily through the narrow space. "She's confused. he announced to no one in particular, though his eyes darted around for allies. Scamming her way into business class, probably switched tickets with someone in the gate area. I've seen it before. A ripple of sound answered him. Low murmurs, the restless shifting of passengers who suddenly felt like observers in a courtroom. The aisle clogged as people slowed to catch every word. A man in row 4, dressed in a tailored suit, leaned toward his seatmate and muttered loud enough for several nearby to hear. "Yeah, I've seen this before. People sneaking into seats they didn't pay for." His tone carried the casual certainty of someone convinced his prejudice was simply fact. The words stung like an open declaration, yet Alicia remained still. Her posture did not change. Her gaze stayed forward, her hands folded neatly over her boarding pass, which she had again set plainly in view. She gave them nothing, not anger, not fear, not even defense. That composure unsettled Gregory more than any argument might have. But his volume only increased. "This is ridiculous. Some of us actually pay for these seats. We don't sneak our way up here." He gestured vaguely toward Alicia, dismissing her presence with a flick of his wrist. "Holding up an entire flight because she doesn't know her place." The words hung in the cabin. A few passengers looked down, ashamed. Others watched with expressions caught between sympathy and uncertainty. And then there were those who nodded along quietly, silently affirming Gregory's assumptions. Janet Morrison, the flight attendant, tried to keep her voice level as she leaned toward Alicia. "Ma'am, if you'll just come with me, I can get you settled in another seat. We really need to begin taxiing. It would be the easiest solution for everyone." Everyone. The word fell like a weight, as though Alicia's dignity was expendable for the sake of convenience, as though her paid seat, her rightful place, was less valuable than keeping one loud man content. "I am already in my seat," Alicia replied calmly. Her voice was quiet but carried, firm without rising in pitch. Janet's smile tightened. "I understand, but if you could just cooperate, we'll avoid further delay. There are open seats in economy." Economy. The suggestion wasn't framed as punishment, but the subtext was undeniable. Move to the back, out of sight, out of mind. Phones lifted higher now, more passengers were recording openly. Some whispered support under their breath, but few spoke loud enough to challenge Gregory directly. The imbalance was clear. One woman's quiet assertion of her right to sit where she belonged was being drowned out by the louder certainty of a man who assumed she didn't. Gregory pressed on, emboldened by Janet's words. "See? Even the crew knows there's been a mistake. Why can't you just move? People like me have important things to get to. We don't have time for games." The businessman in row 4 nodded again, muttering, "Exactly. She's the one delaying everyone, not him." The humiliation deepened. Not because Alicia faltered, but because authority and peers alike had framed her as the problem. Every second she sat there became another silent accusation. Difficult, uncooperative, disruptive. Alicia's composure, however, did not waver. Her chin lifted slightly and her eyes shifted toward Janet, who was still hovering with expectation. "I will not move to a seat that is not mine," she said evenly. Her restraint contrasted so starkly with Gregory's bluster that it only fueled his anger further. His voice cracked louder, breaking the thin boundary of civility. "This is absurd. We all know what's happening here. She doesn't belong here. She's holding us hostage for attention." The words sparked gasps from a few passengers. Phones caught it all. The tone, the phrasing, the implications so sharp it required no translation. Janet glanced around nervously, aware of the recording devices but still unwilling to correct him. "Ma'am," she whispered again, "please, you're putting me in a difficult position." But the difficult position wasn't Alicia's doing. It was the weight of prejudice, amplified by authority, that defaulted to the louder voice, the whiter face, the easier narrative. And though Alicia sat still, every eye in the cabin watched her, recording not only with cameras, but with the quiet witness of memory. She had become the spectacle, the inconvenience, the disposable body expected to step aside so the rest of the world could carry on undisturbed. When Gregory leaned closer once more, his next words rang louder than before, cutting through the murmurs like a strike of lightning. "Some people just don't know their place." The silence that followed was heavier than anything yet. From seat 3B, a student shifted uneasily. Leah Park, 21 years old, carried the quiet habit of observing more than speaking. She had seen enough viral clips to recognize how quickly moments like this escalated and how silence often worked against the victim. Her phone rested in her hand, thumb hovering over the screen. Then, with a small breath, she tapped Go Live. The lens captured the image instantly. Gregory Hale leaning aggressively into row 3, his voice sharp and booming. Alicia Warren, still seated, calm and unyielding. And Janet Morrison, the flight attendant, visibly pressing for Alicia to move. "Y'all seeing this?" Leah whispered into her phone. Her voice barely carried, but it threaded the moment with context. A black woman defending her rightful seat against a man certain she didn't belong there. Viewers trickled in almost immediately. Dozens, then hundreds, as the algorithm carried the live stream outward. Comments began scrolling up Leah's screen. Why is she being told to move when her ticket is in her hand? Classic racial profiling. He's loud, so they believe him. Stay strong, sis. We see you. Gregory's voice grew louder, unaware that his words were already being broadcast far beyond the cabin. "She's scamming the system," he snapped, waving his boarding pass. "This isn't charity seating. This is business class, paid months in advance. She can't just wander in here like she owns the place." The comments multiplied. "Like she owns the place? Wow. Notice he hasn't even looked at her pass. Bias all over this. Tag the airline. People need to see this." Leah angled her phone slightly, catching Janet as she leaned toward Alicia once more. "Ma'am, if you just cooperate, I can place you in economy until we resolve this." The online audience erupted. Economy? She's holding the right ticket? They always want the black woman to sacrifice for everyone else's comfort. "I'm screen recording this. Don't let them delete it later." Alicia did not move. Her voice remained even. "This is my seat." The restraint in her tone contrasted so sharply with Gregory's shouting that viewers began calling it out directly. "She's the only calm one here, and they're treating her like the problem." This is why we record. Without video, no one would believe her. Phones elsewhere in the cabin were lifted higher now. Leah wasn't the only one streaming. Passengers across the aisle captured wide angles, posting clips that spread to Twitter and Instagram within minutes. The story was no longer locked inside a pressurized cabin. It was airborne before the plane itself left the ground. Gregory leaned back, face red with indignation, and announced loudly to anyone listening, "I work hard for my money. I don't sit in economy for a reason. If she wants a taste of this section, she should earn it." Gasps rippled across the rows. Leah's viewer count jumped again. Comments scrolled faster than she could read them. "That's straight racism. No question. I can't believe the crew is letting him talk like this. What's the airline's handle? Tag them now." The flight attendant's silence in the face of those words only deepened the online anger. What was once a private dispute had become evidence of systemic bias, witnessed live by thousands. Leah steadied her phone, her voice hushed but resolute. "We're at Gate B12, JFK, Flight 447. Y'all need to see this." Injustice had slipped beyond the walls of the aircraft. Every insult Gregory hurled, every dismissal Janet gave, every calm refusal Alicia made, it was all preserved, duplicated, shared in real time. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer just about one woman being pushed out of her seat. Now the entire world was watching, and the truth was undeniable. And Gregory Hale, oblivious to the storm brewing online, leaned in once more, ready to deliver the words that would ignite the cabin beyond repair. The cabin doors had nearly closed when the ripple of voices finally reached the cockpit. The delay meant paperwork, complaints, and a restless chain of passengers filing reports. The captain stepped out, adjusting the brim of his hat with the brisk irritation of someone dragged from his schedule. Captain Brooks scanned the aisle, his eyes narrowing on the cluster forming around row 3. Phones hovered high, passengers leaned into armrests, the atmosphere tense enough to stop the boarding line. He strode forward, voice clipped. "What seems to be the problem here?" Gregory Hale straightened instantly, seizing his opportunity. "Yes, Captain. Thank you. This woman is in my seat. I've paid for 3A for months. She refuses to move." He held out his ticket as though it were a badge of truth. Brooks' eyes flicked briefly toward Alicia, then back to Gregory. It was subtle, but the assumption was clear in the way his attention weighted heavier on one than the other. A calm black woman seated quietly versus an agitated white businessman brimming with confidence. One of them had to be wrong, and instinct told him which. Alicia raised her boarding pass once more. "My seat assignment is 3A. Her voice carried no tremor, no aggression, just fact. Brooks didn't take it from her hand. Instead, he turned to Janet Morrison. "What's going on here?" Janet's response was quick, almost rehearsed. "It looks like a duplicate assignment. I've already asked her to move so we can resolve it." The captain gave a short nod as though that settled the matter. He looked back to Alicia, his tone shifting into command. "Ma'am, I need you to cooperate. Either move to another seat or we'll have to escort you off the aircraft until this can be sorted at the gate." The murmurs grew louder. Several passengers gasped outright. Phones zoomed in closer. Alicia remained steady, hands folded over her boarding pass. "Captain, this is my seat." Brooks's patience thinned visibly. He raised his voice slightly, as though she were a child refusing to follow directions. "I will not ask again. We are minutes from departure. You can either move voluntarily, or I will have security remove you." Gregory's smirk spread into a grin. He leaned back in the seat with the ease of someone certain the system worked in his favor. "Thank you, Captain. I've been more than patient." The arrogance in his tone made a few passengers exchange uneasy glances. Leah's live stream scrolled with furious comments. "Unbelievable. He didn't even look at her pass. This is bias, plain and simple. She's calm, he's yelling, and they side with him. Remove her, she's the one who's right." But Brooks didn't see the comments. He didn't see the thousands of viewers now watching. He saw only the image in front of him. A confident businessman insisting on his rights, and a composed black woman who refused to yield. His training told him to resolve conflicts quickly, and the easiest resolution was to move the one who looked like less trouble to eject. Alicia lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Captain, I am in the correct seat. Removing me would be a mistake." Brooks stiffened, his jaw clenched as he checked his watch, the minutes of delay stacking against him. "Ma'am, you have 30 seconds to decide. Comply, or you'll be escorted off this aircraft." The silence in the cabin was suffocating. Dozens of passengers leaned in, their phones now recording openly. The weight of injustice was visible in every angle of the frame. Authority siding with confidence over evidence, assumption over truth. Gregory leaned forward, whispering just loud enough for Alicia to hear. "Told you, some of us belong up here, some don't." Alicia's expression didn't change. Her silence was sharper than any words, but the humiliation pressed heavy in the air. Maya Chen's narration draws the truth. Bias in authority doesn't always arrive as slurs or open hostility. Sometimes it's as small as who gets believed first, whose document is glanced at, whose word carries more weight. It's in the shortcuts leaders take, siding with the voice that sounds familiar, the face that feels safe. Injustice lives not only in the shouting, but in the silence of those who should know better. Captain Brooks stood firm, arms crossed, waiting for compliance. Gregory smiled wider, the victor in his own mind. The flight was his again. But what none of them realized yet was that Alicia Warren had not even begun to speak. For a long, tense moment, Alicia sat motionless in seat 3A. The captain's words hung in the air like a verdict already passed. 30 seconds to comply. Gregory Hale reclined slightly, the smug grin of victory spreading across his face. The murmurs around them quieted, everyone waiting to see if the woman would bow to authority and slip silently toward the exit. Then Alicia moved. Not in retreat, not in defeat. She reached for the overhead bin with measured composure, drawing down her sleek black briefcase. Every eye in the cabin followed her hands as she placed it gently across her lap. She did not rise. She did not gather her belongings for departure. She simply unlocked the polished clasp and opened it with deliberate calm. Gregory chuckled under his breath. Finally, she's getting out of here. But instead of pulling out a jacket or purse, Alicia slid a leather folder free. The rich cover caught the cabin light, embossed with a faint corporate crest. She laid it across her lap and withdrew a single sheet of paper, its header marked by sharp logos and stamped signatures. Without a word, she handed it to Captain Brooks. The captain took it, almost out of reflex, his irritation plain. But as his eyes scanned the page, his posture shifted. His frown smoothed into uncertainty. He read further, his lips parting slightly, his jaw slackening. The color in his face drained as if the words on the page had pulled the ground out from under him. Passengers leaned closer, straining to see. Phones tilted, trying to capture both his expression and the document in his hand. The chat on Leah Park's livestream scrolled so fast it was a blur. What did she just hand him? Look at his face. He shook. Something big is happening. Don't blink. Gregory leaned forward, impatient. Well, tell her to move. What's the holdup? Brooks didn't answer. He swallowed hard, scanning the page again, then looked at Alicia as though seeing her for the first time. His voice dropped, quieter, almost reverent. Miss Warren, I had no idea. The murmur in the cabin swelled. Leah's viewers typed furiously. Wait, did he say Miss Warren? Is that Alicia Warren? Google her name, now. Gregory blinked, confused. What do you mean, Miss Warren? She's in my seat. Just tell her to go. But the captain didn't move. His fingers trembled slightly as he held the document, his authority crumbling under the weight of what he now knew. Janet Morrison stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. The moment her eyes landed on the paper, her face drained of color too. She mouthed the words under her breath. Eyes wide. Shareholder, controlling stake. Alicia didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She simply reclaimed the page, slid it back into the leather folder, and rested it on her lap once more. The silence she allowed to linger spoke louder than any declaration could. Gregory shifted uneasily, his smugness faltering. What's going on? What did she show you? His voice rose, cracking under the weight of uncertainty. Phones captured his panic, broadcasting it live. Leah's stream exploded with viewers posting screenshots of news articles, photos, financial reports. Confirmed, Alicia Warren, CEO of Warren Global Holdings. She's on Forbes's power list. Billionaire. Her company owns majority shares in the airline. In the cabin, whispers turned into open exclamations. She's the owner? No way. That's her? The tide shifted so suddenly it was dizzying. Passengers craned their necks to see her, no longer questioning her place, but stunned by how far above it she truly stood. Alicia remained perfectly still, eyes forward, as if none of the chaos mattered. But the captain's pale face told the story. Authority had bowed, and every passenger in that cabin had witnessed the moment it snapped. The captain still held the afterimage of the document in his mind, the signatures and titles pressing against his authority like a weight too heavy to ignore. Janet Morrison's voice faltered as she whispered again, controlling stake, but the words dissolved into the stunned hush blanketing the cabin. All eyes turned back to Alicia. For the first time since the confrontation began, she chose to break her silence. Her tone was measured, her pace unhurried, as though she had no need to raise her voice. My name is Alicia Warren. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Warren Global Holdings. Our firm owns the majority stake in this airline. The words landed like a shockwave across the rows. Disbelief rippled first, passengers blinking, mouths parting as if they had misheard. Then realization crept in, one face after another tightening with shame, awareness of how quickly they had judged her. Phones angled higher, desperate to capture her calm announcement. Leah Park's livestream flooded with reactions. Wait, did she just say CEO? I looked it up. Forbes has her listed. Net worth $2.8 billion. She literally owns the airline. This is bigger than I thought. On screen, viewers shared screenshots from financial sites, headlines from business articles, glossy magazine covers. Alicia Warren's name flashed across TikTok comments in real time, her reputation surfacing from digital archives into the cabin's tense silence. Gregory Hale's smirk collapsed into a twitching line. He blinked rapidly, his face draining of color as he processed the words. His voice stammered, thin where it had once boomed. That's impossible. You can't. She's lying. She has to be lying. But the captain's expression betrayed the truth. He shifted his weight uncomfortably, hat tucked beneath his arm now. His authority cracked. Janet's hands fidgeted against her notepad, the brightness of her practiced smile extinguished. They both knew. Everyone knew. Alicia remained seated, her posture unchanged, but the power in her presence filled the cabin. The silence after her declaration wasn't just awe, it was indictment. The faces turned toward her carried recognition of their own assumptions, their willingness to believe Gregory's voice over her evidence, their complicity in watching her humiliation unfold. Leah's stream ticked past 10,000 viewers. Comments scrolled too fast to catch. This is history happening live. The arrogance of that man, and she owns the airline. Proof that racism isn't about ignorance, it's about assumption. Passengers exchanged uneasy looks. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, as though caught in their own quiet guilt. The businessman from row 4, who had muttered his agreement with Gregory earlier, leaned back and looked away, his jaw tight. Gregory's voice cracked louder now, grasping at fragments of control. Even if she is who she says, it doesn't give her the right to steal my seat. I paid for it. His insistence sounded hollow, desperate. The weight of his earlier arrogance had flipped back on him, every word now exposing his fragility. Phones caught his trembling hands, his flushed cheeks, his retreat into sputtering excuses. The once commanding presence was shrinking before the cabin's eyes. He no longer looked powerful, no longer looked certain. He looked small, cornered by the truth he couldn't dismiss. The captain cleared his throat, but the sound cracked instead of carrying authority. "Miss Warren, I owe you an apology." He hesitated, then added softly, "We all do." The words deepened the silence. It wasn't just one man apologizing to her. It was the echo of every bias, every dismissal, every assumption she had endured, concentrated into a single admission. Alicia's eyes swept the cabin, her gaze steady, unflinching. "The problem," she said, voice calm but sharp, "is that if I weren't the CEO, you all would have believed him. If I weren't the majority shareholder, you would have escorted me off this aircraft." Passengers shifted again, her words hitting their mark. Phones captured it, streams broadcasting her voice across countless screens. The injustice was undeniable. Gregory shrank further into the seat, muttering incoherently. "I didn't know. I didn't mean." But his words barely carried, drowned out by the chorus of digital outrage. The power dynamic had flipped entirely. Alicia Warren, once pressured to move, now commanded the cabin without raising her voice. Gregory Hale, who moments earlier had smirked with certainty, now sat trembling in the shadow of the truth. And the question lingered heavy in the air. What would she do next, now that the entire world was watching? The silence in the cabin thickened after Alicia's declaration. Gregory Hale sat stiffly, his hands trembling against the armrests, sweat beading along his forehead. For the first time since the confrontation began, his eyes darted nervously, searching for support among the passengers who now avoided his gaze. Alicia leaned back slightly, her voice calm but edged with iron. "Mr. Hale," she said, the measured use of his name slicing through the air. "You assumed I did not belong here. You decided my presence in this seat was fraudulent, not because of evidence, but because of what I look like." Gregory opened his mouth, but nothing coherent emerged. "I just thought." She cut across him, her tone steady, unyielding. "You thought I was scamming my way into a seat I paid for. You thought raising your voice and pointing fingers would erase my right to sit here. That is harassment. That is prejudice, and you carried it out in front of dozens of witnesses." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Phones continued recording, their silent lenses holding him accountable in ways words never could. Leah's livestream comments poured in. She's speaking truth right to his face. He can't even look her in the eye now. Accountability. Finally, Gregory's face flushed deeper. He looked down at his hands, his earlier bravado replaced by shame. Alicia's gaze then turned to the flight attendant. Janet Morrison stiffened under the weight of it, her professional poise crumbling. "And you," Alicia said firmly, "you looked at him, and you believed him. You didn't so much as glance at my boarding pass. You asked me to move, to step aside, to sacrifice what was mine, simply because he was louder." Janet's lips quivered. "Miss Warren, I didn't mean." "Intent is irrelevant," Alicia interrupted. "Impact is what matters, and the impact of your actions was to strip me of dignity in front of every person here. You validated his aggression and treated me as disposable." Janet's eyes filled with tears, her cheeks pale. She glanced helplessly toward the captain, but Brooks stood rigid, his own authority fractured. Alicia shifted her attention to him. "Captain Brooks, you threatened to deplane me without ever looking at my documentation. You sided with the man who shouted instead of the woman who sat quietly, stating facts. That decision was not neutral, it was bias. And now it is recorded." Brooks swallowed hard, his jaw tight, his earlier authority gone. "Miss Warren, I see that now." "You see it because the world is watching," Alicia said sharply, gesturing toward the raised phones. But would you have seen it otherwise? Or would I have been walked off this plane as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience? The cabin was utterly still. Even the faint hum of the engines seemed muted. Every passenger sat caught between awe and discomfort, confronted with the raw exposure of systemic prejudice they had silently witnessed. Leah's livestream flashed with comments. "This is bigger than one seat. She's exposing the whole system. Notice how calm she is and how rattled they are. They'd have thrown her off if she wasn't the CEO. Think about that." Gregory rubbed his temple, whispering under his breath, "I didn't know. I didn't mean." His words sounded hollow, irrelevant against the clarity of Alicia's voice. Her eyes swept the cabin once more. "This is not about a seat. This is about assumption. This is about how quickly people are ready to strip dignity from someone who looks like me. And it is about accountability, because every one of you saw it happen." The shame settled heavier. Janet blinked rapidly, tears slipping down her cheeks. The captain stared at the floor, his authority broken. And Gregory Hale sat trembling, stripped of the certainty that had carried him so boldly only minutes before. Alicia leaned back in her seat, her composure unshaken. The tables had turned. The humiliation was no longer hers to bear. The cabin remained hushed, the weight of Alicia's words pressing on every passenger. Gregory Hale slouched in his seat, stripped of his earlier bravado, while Janet Morrison's face glistened with tears. Captain Brooks stood awkwardly, hat in hand, his authority now bent under the pressure of exposure. Alicia placed the leather folder back into her briefcase, then lifted her eyes to the captain. Her voice was calm, unshaken. "This flight will not depart until proper protocol is followed." Brooks blinked, uncertain. "Miss Warren?" "You heard me?" she interrupted softly, but the quiet command carried the weight of finality. "As majority shareholder of this airline, I will not allow a single passenger to be deplaned without documented cause, and I will not allow staff misconduct to go unrecorded. If you proceed with this flight as though nothing happened, you are complicit in the very behavior we just witnessed." Her words cracked through the cabin like a gavel. Murmurs erupted instantly. Passengers turned to one another in disbelief. Phones shot upward, filming with renewed urgency. Leah Park's livestream flooded with comments. "Did she just order the flight grounded? She has that authority. She owns the airline. This is history unfolding live." The captain's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He glanced at Janet, then back at Alicia. "Grounding a flight will cause significant delays, Miss Warren. There are connections, schedules. There is nothing more important than accountability," Alicia replied, her voice slicing through his excuses. "If connections are missed, so be it. If schedules are broken, so be it. What happened here cannot be erased by moving forward as if it did not occur. You will file a delay, and I will personally speak to the board regarding this incident once we land." The authority in her tone stripped Brooks of any illusion of choice. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his radio, his voice faltering as he called for an official delay. "Ladies and gentlemen," the intercom cracked, his words echoing across the cabin. "Due to an internal issue, this flight's departure will be delayed." The announcement rippled like thunder. Gasps, groans, scattered exclamations filled the cabin. Passengers craned their necks to glimpse the woman in 3A who had just halted their journey with a few words. But their frustration quickly folded into awe as whispers circulated. "She's the CEO. She owns the airline. She's the reason this is happening." Gregory Hale's face turned scarlet. He shifted in his seat, sputtering. "You can't do this. You can't just stop a flight for this nonsense." His voice cracked with desperation. Alicia's gaze turned on him, steady and sharp. "This flight is delayed because of you. Your harassment, your racist assumptions, and the crew's failure to address them are now documented and under review. You created this disruption, and I will not allow this aircraft to move until the record reflects that truth." Phones captured every word. Leah's viewers surged past 30,000, comments exploding in waves. She's not just fighting for herself, she's making it systemic. Grounding the flight, that's accountability in action. This man just ruined it for everyone, and she's right to stop it. Captain Brooks stood stiffly at the front of the cabin, his face pale. Janet Morrison hovered near the galley, hands clasped tightly, eyes glistening. Both understood the magnitude of what had just happened. This wasn't only a passenger dispute anymore. It was a public reckoning. Alicia leaned back, her voice calm but undeniable. This flight will serve as proof that discrimination has consequences. Not whispers, not apologies whispered in shame, but real consequences that disrupt systems until change is forced. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, many nodding despite themselves. Even those who had whispered agreement with Gregory earlier now avoided his eyes, aware of how their silence had been part of the humiliation. Maya Chen's narration underscores the weight of this moment. Systemic injustice is not dismantled by politeness, by waiting quietly for change. It is dismantled when those with power refuse to let the system continue without accountability. Alicia Warren grounded more than a flight that day. She grounded an entire network of assumptions, forcing everyone on board and thousands watching online to confront the truth. The captain finally lowered his head, defeated. "Yes, Miss Warren, the flight will remain grounded until further notice." Gasps circled the cabin again. Gregory Hale pressed his palms to his temples, muttering curses under his breath, but his voice carried no power anymore. Every passenger knew exactly where authority now sat. And in seat 3A, Alicia Warren sat as she had from the beginning, calm, unshaken, commanding without raising her voice. Gregory Hale shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the sweat rolling down his temple now visible to every phone recording. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a twitching desperation that made his voice crack. "Please," he stammered, let's not blow this out of proportion. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know." Alicia's gaze locked on him, unblinking. Her silence stretched until the entire cabin seemed to lean forward, waiting. Finally, she spoke, her voice cutting through the air like steel wrapped in velvet. "Your first concern isn't about being wrong. It isn't about the harassment, the humiliation, or the prejudice you displayed. Your first concern is what happens to you, your career, your reputation, your family name. That says everything." Gregory's throat bobbed. His hands fumbled at his lap, gripping the edge of the seat like a lifeline. "I'm sorry, I truly am. I didn't mean to." Alicia leaned forward just slightly, her tone sharp but controlled. "You meant every word you said. You meant it when you accused me of scamming. You meant it when you told me I didn't belong. You meant it when you called for me to be removed. Intent doesn't erase impact. And the impact of your actions is on full display, for everyone here and for tens of thousands watching online." Leah Park's livestream scrolled furiously with comments. "This is accountability in real time. He's scared now, but he wasn't scared when he tried to humiliate her. Every word she says is truth." Gregory's voice cracked again, thin and pleading. "Don't ruin me over this. Please. I have a family. I have a name to protect." Alicia sat back, her composure steady. "You should have thought of that before you tried to strip me of mine." She turned toward the captain. "Effective immediately, Mr. Hale is banned from flying on this airline. Permanently. His actions today violated every principle of safety, respect, and equality this company claims to uphold." The cabin gasped. Some passengers covered their mouths. Others nodded solemnly, recognizing the magnitude of the moment. Gregory's face went white, his lips trembling. You can't do that." "I can," Alicia replied, her voice calm but final. "And I just did." The silence was suffocating. Every passenger understood that they were witnessing something irreversible. The man who had strutted with entitlement minutes earlier now sat small, shrunken, and powerless. But Alicia wasn't finished. Her gaze shifted toward the flight attendant, whose posture stiffened instantly. "Janet Morrison," she said evenly, "your actions today will undergo formal disciplinary review. You failed to verify documentation. You defaulted to siding with aggression instead of truth. That is negligence, and it reflects bias that cannot be ignored." Janet's face crumpled. Tears welled in her eyes as she stammered, "Miss Warren, I didn't mean harm." "Again," Alicia interrupted, "intent is irrelevant. Impact is what matters. You made a paying passenger feel disposable. That will be addressed." The captain closed his eyes, the shame etched into his features. The other crew members shifted nervously in the aisle, their own faces pale under the fluorescent lights. Passengers stared in stunned silence. The reality of what had unfolded was undeniable. A public reckoning, not whispered behind closed doors but spoken aloud in front of witnesses who had seen every second. Phones continued to record, ensuring the world outside would hear it too. Gregory Hale buried his face in his hands. Janet Morrison stood frozen, trembling. And Alicia Warren sat in seat 3A, calm, steady, the embodiment of authority reclaimed. The humiliation that had been forced on her had been returned, not through shouting, but through accountability. And in that cabin, every soul understood. This flight had become more than a journey. It had become a lesson. The air inside the cabin was still, heavy with what had just transpired. Gregory Hale sat crumpled in his seat, head in his hands, and Janet Morrison stood frozen near the galley, her face pale and streaked with tears. The captain lingered awkwardly at the front, his posture stiff, authority visibly fractured. Then Alicia Warren rose. The quiet motion drew every eye. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand silence. She simply stood with the poise of someone who had been underestimated too many times to count, and who no longer intended to remain quiet. Her gaze swept across the rows, past the raised phones and nervous expressions. "You have all just witnessed something," she began, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the space. What happened here was not an isolated dispute about a seat. It was a demonstration of how prejudice works in everyday life. The silence deepened. Passengers leaned forward instinctively, as though compelled by the weight of her words. Systemic racism, Alicia continued, does not always announce itself with slurs or blatant hatred. More often, it reveals itself in the smallest assumptions, the quiet decisions made without evidence, the voices believed because they sound familiar, the ones dismissed because they don't. It is in the way authority defaults to siding with anger over calm, to siding with a white man's certainty over a black woman's facts. Several passengers shifted uneasily. A few lowered their eyes, recalling how quickly they had assumed Gregory must be right. Alicia gestured toward the rows. "You all saw me hold a boarding pass. You all saw me sit quietly in my assigned seat. Yet his accusations were given more weight than my evidence, and the crew, who should have upheld fairness, chose convenience instead. That is racism. It doesn't need to shout to exist. It thrives in silence, in bias, in assumptions that compound harm over and over again." Phones recorded her from every angle. Leah Park's livestream numbers soared past 50,000, comments flooding with affirmation. "She's teaching the entire plane right now." Powerful. This is exactly what we mean when we talk about systemic racism. I'll never forget this speech. Respect. Alicia turned slightly, her eyes finding Leah. "And I thank you," she said warmly, "for having the courage to record. Your decision to act ensured that this moment will not be hidden. Courage like yours is what holds systems accountable when they try to silence truth." Leah lowered her phone slightly, overwhelmed, her cheeks flushing. A few passengers began nodding in her direction, acknowledging the significance of her choice. Alicia's gaze swept back across the cabin. "Every person here carries responsibility. Some of you sat silent while I was humiliated. Some of you nodded along when lies were spoken. That silence is what allows injustice to thrive. It is never neutral. It is complicity. But you also have the power to choose differently, to speak, to record, to refuse to let prejudice dictate who belongs and who does not." Her words fell heavy, yet they carried a strange clarity, as though the very air shifted. For the first time, the shame in the passengers' faces gave way to something else. Recognition. "This flight," Alicia said, "will land eventually. We will all go back to our lives. But remember this moment. Remember how quickly you saw truth ignored in favor of assumption. Remember how easily bias showed itself in uniform and authority. And remember that it took exposure, consequence, and courage for the truth to be honored. If you forget, then this will happen again, to someone without the power to stop it." A hush followed. Then from the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. Slowly, others joined, hesitant at first, then stronger. Within moments, the cabin filled with applause. Not the raucous applause of entertainment, but the steady, reverent applause of people awakened to a reality they could no longer deny. Some passengers wiped at their eyes. Others looked away, ashamed. But all of them clapped, their palms echoing the truth Alicia had just laid bare. On Leah's phone screen, the chat scrolled relentlessly. "Standing ovation from my living room. This woman is changing lives midair. The world needed to see this." Alicia didn't bow, didn't smile. She simply sat back down in seat 3A, composed as ever, her lesson delivered. And the cabin, once filled with murmurs of doubt, now sat in stunned silence, carrying the weight of what they had just been taught. The applause dwindled into a silence more profound than the chaos that had filled the cabin minutes earlier. Passengers sat straighter, their expressions altered by what they had witnessed. The shame lingered, yes, but it mingled now with respect, with a dawning awareness of the lesson they had been forced to absorb. Captain Brooks cleared his throat, his voice steadier than before, but still carrying the hesitation of a man stripped of easy authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed with preparations for departure." His words were met not with groans of impatience, but with a quiet acceptance. Everyone knew why they had been delayed, and no one would forget it. Alicia Warren eased back into her seat in 3A. She retrieved her briefcase once more, but this time not to wield documents as a shield. She simply withdrew a slim folder of reports, flipping it open with the serenity of someone who had never lost control in the first place. Her posture was composed, her expression unshaken. The message was clear. Humiliation had been attempted, but dignity remained intact. Gregory Hale sat rigid beside her, his body turned slightly away, his eyes fixed on the window. Every trace of arrogance had drained from his face. Where once he had puffed his chest and commanded the aisle, he now looked small, diminished, a man collapsing under the weight of exposure. Janet Morrison hovered silently at the front of the cabin. Her shoulders slumped. She avoided eye contact with the passengers, her earlier authority gone. Phones lowered slowly, though not turned off. Passengers still captured the quiet aftermath, the poised CEO, the trembling accuser, the shaken crew. Leah Park's livestream counter flashed past 80,000 viewers. The comment feed moved too quickly to read in full, but certain lines burned through. "This isn't just viral, this is historic." She turned humiliation into power. Every airline better be watching this right now. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, the rumble of the engines filled the silence. Yet the atmosphere was different now. It was no longer charged with hostility, but with reflection. People shifted in their seats, glancing at Alicia with new eyes. Where earlier there had been skepticism, there was now awe. Maya Chen's narration frames the moment. Calm strength has always been the quietest weapon against injustice. Alicia Warren had endured humiliation not with rage, but with composure that made the injustice unmistakable. She had turned the weight of assumptions into evidence, showing the cabin and the world that dignity cannot be stripped by volume or bias. The plane began to taxi. Alicia continued reading, eyes scanning the page, pen poised between her fingers. It was as though the storm had passed without disturbing her equilibrium. She didn't need to look around. She didn't need the validation of applause. Her silence spoke louder. She had nothing to prove. Gregory's hands twitched against his knees, restless, restless, restless. Passengers who had once nodded with him now refused to meet his eyes. He had been the loudest voice in the room, and now he was reduced to the quiet of shame. Leah glanced up from her phone, astonishment plain on her face. The number of viewers ticked past 100,000. News outlets were already being tagged, clips reshared, hashtags climbing across platforms. The story was no longer just a live stream, it was a national conversation sparking in real time. The seatbelt light chimed, signaling takeoff. Passengers fastened their belts, the click of metal buckles a steady rhythm. Yet their eyes still drifted back to Alicia, seated where she had been all along, unshaken, unbothered, resolute. As the plane lifted into the air, it carried more than passengers. It carried the weight of a story spreading across the nation, a reminder of what happens when silence is broken, when injustice is confronted, when power is reclaimed without raising a hand. And in seat 3A, Alicia Warren turned another page of her report, her strength undisturbed, her legacy already unfolding far beyond the cabin walls. The plane touched down in Miami beneath the late afternoon sun, but the true weight of the journey had already been carried long before the wheels met the runway. Passengers remained quiet as the aircraft taxied to the gate, their eyes stealing glances at seat 3A, where Alicia Warren sat, calm as ever, her folder of reports now neatly tucked away. For Gregory Hale, the landing brought no relief. He shrank into his seat, his complexion ashen, his tie loosened as though the air itself refused to give him comfort. The confident businessman who once declared who did and did not belong in business class now resembled a man stripped of certainty, awaiting judgment he could no longer outrun. At the gate, security boarded swiftly. Their eyes scanned the rows until they settled on Gregory. "Sir, you'll need to come with us," one of them said firmly. Phones lifted once again, passengers recording as Gregory stumbled to his feet. His protests were weak, broken fragments of apologies spilling out. "It was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean." But the officers flanked him, guiding him down the aisle as cameras captured the fall of his arrogance. He exited not as the victor he imagined when he first stood over Alicia, but as a broken man walking under the weight of his own disgrace. The silence in the cabin as he passed was telling. Not one passenger spoke in his defense. Janet Morrison lingered near the galley, her posture tense, her uniform suddenly heavy with shame. When the passengers disembarked, she was quietly pulled aside by her supervisor. "You'll be placed on suspension pending review," the woman stated curtly. Janet's lips trembled, but she had no words left. Authority had once bent in her favor, but now it turned its gaze on her. The cost of bias had arrived at her door. Later that evening, Alicia stepped into a polished conference room at the airline's Miami headquarters. The board of directors sat around the long table, their faces tight with unease. The viral clips had already reached them. Hashtags were trending across platforms, news anchors repeating the details of Flight 447's delay. The company's reputation hung in the balance. Alicia placed her leather folder on the table, her voice steady as she addressed them. "What happened on that flight is not unique. It is the fourth such incident I have personally witnessed this year on your aircrafts. The difference is that today, it was recorded and exposed. Tomorrow, it will be headlines. And unless change is immediate, your airline will be known not for its service, but for its discrimination." No one interrupted. They knew the truth of her words. She continued, outlining clear demands: mandatory anti-bias training for all crew, stricter accountability protocols for incidents of discrimination, direct reporting systems for passengers who feel unsafe, and an external review board to oversee enforcement. Her tone had not the suggestion of reform, but the finality of command. "You will implement these policies," Alicia said, her eyes sweeping the room. "Not because it looks good in a press release, but because passengers' dignity is not negotiable. If I must, I will use my controlling stake to replace leadership that refuses to prioritize equity." The board members nodded in solemn agreement. They understood there was no alternative. The world had already chosen sides, and it was not theirs to defend. Meanwhile, the clips continued to spread. Leah Park's livestream was reshared across networks, major outlets running headlines. CEO grounds flight over racism, airline faces reckoning. Alicia's calm strength was praised, her words dissected, her composure contrasted with Gregory's arrogance. What began as humiliation had become a movement, her refusal to yield sparking conversations across the nation. Maya Chen closes with reflection. Systemic injustice does not always arrive in violent forms. Sometimes it hides in the small assumptions, the quiet dismissals, the authority that bends toward those who look familiar. But when those moments are documented, confronted, and answered with courage, the silence that sustains injustice begins to crack. The image of Alicia Warren, sitting calm in her rightful seat, refusing to be moved, would linger far beyond the cabin of Flight 447. It was more than a story, it was a lesson. And to the viewers watching now, remember this: injustice thrives in silence. When you witness it, your courage matters. Speak up, record, refuse to look away. Because the moment you act, change begins. Before you leave, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more stories that matter, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?